Hi, I'm Mitch Gallagher. Welcome to Sweetwater Soundcheck. We have a special guest here in the studio, and we are checking out an amazing live sound console. This is Michael Adams from Waves.
Hey, man. How are you?
Great to see you.
Likewise.
Glad to have you back here. Always a pleasure to have you in our studio.
Thank you, sir.
This is unlike any console I've ever seen.
Well, it's pretty different, yeah. This is the eMotion LV1. It's a live console that we at Waves have been developing for the last few years. This is developed to run on what we call the SoundGrid audio network protocol. And SoundGrid is something that over the last few years we've been developing hard and fast. We've been using this in the live industry now for probably nearly 10 years. We released the Y16 card back in 2008 for Yamaha consoles to be able to use Waves plugins on a sidecar as well as the inboard processing on the road. And since then, with the SoundGrid audio protocol platform, we've actually managed to get people to have the ability to use Waves and now SoundGrid third-party plugins on pretty much every live console on the planet. So it's become an industry standard. We're really, really happy with the progress. And at any given time now, Waves SoundGrid is on 9 out of 10 of the world tours.
It's amazing.
So eMotion LV1 was us looking at the market and going, okay, so we see what's going on over there, we see what's happening over there, but they're both very, very extreme from small to large. What would be good is if there was a console out there that had flexibility, portability, and the ability to actually be more flexible with your I/O. So what we did was we designed this console, eMotion LV1, around the plug-in technology rather than thinking about adding plug-in technology to an existing console.
Okay.
So the result is a fully featured 64-channel live mixing console that works on tactile hardware controllers and or touchscreens.
Right. So we see the touchscreens here. Is there more to the system than just the screens?
Absolutely. Because it's running on Waves SoundGrid, there is a basic recipe for anything to do with that protocol that you need. In this case, obviously, you need something to control the console. But at the back here, what you can't see right now is there is a SoundGrid DSP server. There is a SoundGrid compatible I/O, and in this case, we're using DigiGrid IOXs, which are 12 pre's, 6 out and 4 headphones, a gigabit switch, and also a computer to actually host the software and the plugins. The key thing here, though, is that the computer that we have the LV1 software on and all of the plug-in technology is not actually doing any of the heavy lifting. All of the audio, including the mix engine of LV1, gets processed and audio crunched and computer packet crunched through the Waves SoundGrid DSP server.
Okay. Now, is this a system that's only intended for huge arena-sized tours, or does it scale to different applications?
Good question. No, LV1 is actually a console that can be anything from, say, 8 in, 8 out, all the way up to 128 channels in and out from multiple I/Os. The other part of LV1 that makes it so flexible is the ability to connect via a SoundGrid to MADI box, like a DigiGrid MGB or MGO, to actually access MADI stage boxes that otherwise would have no SoundGrid compatibility.
Right.
So use existing stage boxes at events and arenas or houses of worship and take your console with you. So there's a huge amount of flexibility with this. One of the key things with the way this works is the simple fact that because we're using a networking protocol that's not It's not something new. It's basically audio over Ethernet. But because we're using layer 2, it means that we can literally lock on to the actual MAC address of any piece of network gear and automatically be able to access streams of audio from it or send to it with very, very little extra work, just basically adding the driver, which I'll show you in a bit.
Right. So what are some of the advantages of a system like this over a, for lack of a better way to say it, a hardware console?
Okay, it's a good question too. I'll use House of Worship as an example. One of the things that happens an awful lot, especially in smaller churches or ministries, is they outgrow their console, and when they outgrow the console, usually the story goes, well, somebody says, okay, you now have to upgrade your console. So everybody, including the volunteers, then have to relearn everything from scratch and it's a time-consuming process. A lot of the time, it's not very enjoyable, and it's certainly a bit of a time black hole. What happens with LV1 is a completely different story. You are learning the console, and once you've learnt the console, when you say, we've maxed out our I/O, or you have a festival or a special event that's going to peak your I/O and then bring it back down again when you go back to normal, you can either rent extra SoundGrid compatible I/O stage boxes, or you can buy more I/O, but the actual control surface, your mixing console, stays exactly the same.
Nice.
So it makes it very, very future-proof and also very user-friendly. Pretty much everybody who touches LV1, even from the studio world, within 5 minutes they're up and running.
Right. So very familiar as far as the interface goes.
Totally. I mean, if you look over here, you've got faders, like a mixing console, any other mixing console, and then you have racks up here. And in every single channel, including talkback and all the auxiliaries, you can add up to 8 plugins on every single channel. You can also have up to 4 touchscreens. So if you see all the tabs up here, we've got Mixer 1, Mixer 2, the show file tab, the patching tab, setup, and then we've got another one over here called channel. Now, if I grab that one off and pull it off, and I go back over here, this screen is now empty and everything is back over there. So if I am using multiple screens, I can actually move things where I want them and customize it to myself. But if you're only using one screen, then everything is going to be where you want it. So for hypothetical sake, let's say, for example, I wanted to make sure that my inventory of all of my SoundGrid I/Os and servers and computers was on this screen. All I would do is grab that, drag it. It's now going to create itself on a separate window, and then I can drag it over here, expand it. Now that is always going to be there. So now I can just bank between my faders over here, my groups, my auxiliaries, my masters, my link DCAs, and then over here I have my inventory, so I can access what I/Os are connected, what control surfaces, and mixer settings, etc. So you can customize it any way you want.
Now you mentioned multiple computers. Is this something where you can also record the show as you're doing it? Can you do a playback for different applications?
Absolutely. One of the biggest things these days is obviously recording a show and virtual soundcheck. Now, because LV1 is actually, it's on a computer. In this case, we're using it on, in this specific system, we're using it on a Mac Mini, which is running Boot Camp with Windows 10. Very solid setup and travels incredibly well, very travel friendly. But it's a computer, so therefore, if I'm looking at the setup I need for a virtual soundcheck or recording the show, any computer that has a SoundGrid driver on it is effectively, potentially, 128 channel I/O. Not just an O, it's an I/O.
Right.
Because it's got the driver on it. So long story short, I can send audio from the console to another computer or vice versa for virtual soundcheck. In this case here, I've got 2 computers. The top one, eMotion LV1 in rack B slot 1, is actually the computer I'm running the console on. But at the same point in time, if I hide that and then bring up this other software here, Tracks Live, you'll see that this is a virtual sound check from a show that we've already recorded, and we've got this patched from the patch bay in the input section. This is just patched all of those inputs from that session so that I can access them in LV1. So that way I can do my virtual sound check, not need the band quite as much, get ready for the show. But in the house of worship side of things, back to that for a second, this is a perfect scenario where, okay, rather than have the band there, let the volunteers actually mess around with the console, use a virtual sound check, get used to the console without actually anybody else needing to be there.
Right.
It's very, very cool. Now, while you're doing that kind of thing, one of the things that you find on many, many consoles is the ability to set up multiple inputs. And if you've got routing for a virtual sound check, you really don't want to have to spend time unrouting that and changing everything around for when the band gets on stage. If you go into the show file there, so you've got all those settings that you can set up with up to 1,000 scenes and up to 1,000 show files and your sessions, your show files. But if you go into your, where are we? Hold on, back over here, back over there. So if we go into our mixer settings, UI settings, there we go, user assignable keys. You have up to 8 slots for user assignable keys. Now, if I click on this, it's a huge, huge list of what you can actually set these assignable keys up to do. The most popular one is already there. It's called Flip A and B Input Channel. So that's already there. If I go back to my system inventory, then go back over to this screen here, at the side, you will always see the user tabs right there. So now, this is not something that you would do live in a show, because it's actually going to stop for a couple of seconds and let the server reprocess and repatch.
Right.
But so for example, you've done with the band, with the music going into the show, everybody's sat down, you need to flip from A to B. Flip. It'll think about it for a second, and then at that point, give it a couple of seconds, and now we've got another computer over here that I'm going to use as a simulation for the band. When I press play, boom, now you've got your separate patches. And the way that works is really simple. If you go into your patching, you have 2 separate inputs. One of them you can have configured for the band, and the second one you can have configured with the output of iTunes or Spotify or your virtual soundcheck. So you've got music while people are sitting down, you've got your virtual soundcheck, but everything else is completely separate without being messed around with.
Right. That's very slick.
It is very slick. While we're in the patch bay quickly, let me just show you. It's like one of the things that makes it very, very easy for patching here is you don't actually have to have a look at everything that you're patching all at the same time. So if all I want to do is look at what's coming out of my specific MacBook over here on the side, I can hide everything else and just see that. So therefore I don't have to fumble for things if I'm doing stuff on the fly.
Right.
The other important thing about this is if you think about Pro Tools rigs on stages that have been ubiquitous for so many years with lots of cables coming out and a bit of inconvenience, what this does means that you can actually have a Pro Tools rig or another Ableton or whatever else on the stage as part of the show with just a network cable rather than everything. And basically you put a switch on the stage, you connect the extra computer, and boom, you're up and running.
Wow, that's very cool.
It is very cool.
That's very cool. So very, very flexible as far as both configuring the system for the I/O that you need,
yeah,
for the DSP processing that you need as well.
Absolutely. I mean, if you look at this screen right here, this being my inventory page, we've currently got one DSP server, and this one happens to be what we call an SGS1. We have 3 different sizes. We've got an impact server, then we've got an SGS1, and then we have what's called the extreme server. So put it simply, small, medium, and large. Now the beautiful thing about these is that you can actually choose what's applicable to your kind of processing power. Mm-hmm. Now for anything over 32 channels, we definitely suggest an SGS1 or an extreme server. But to add to the safety and the redundancy of your show, if you add a second of the same kind of DSP server, then that DSP server automatically becomes redundant. So if, God forbid, a power supply dies in the first one, etc., the second one automatically takes over.
Nice.
There's a bit of a dropout, but a bit of a dropout between switching between servers is a lot better than the entire show coming to a screaming halt.
Right.
So nearly every single live show that is using SoundGrid in any way has 2 SoundGrid DSP servers, just for safety's sake. Mm-hmm. As far as adding IOs, I mean, you're very familiar with SoundGrid Studio on the studio side, which is the driver that runs for any SoundGrid compatible I/O in the recording studio. The inventory and patching page are virtually identical in live sound with LV1, which means that there's familiarity between the 2 different worlds. You've got up to 8 different slots in Rack A for SoundGrid compatible I/Os. You've got up to 8 different slots in Rack B, which is I/O devices that are, for want of a better term, just computers running the SoundGrid driver, because they, for all intensive purposes, are I/Os. Mm-hmm. You can send audio to them or from them. You've currently got 4 slots for servers. You can currently only have 2 of those slots full. We are working on letting you use more. It's to be announced. We're working hard. We have no date for that.
Sure.
And then you have the ability to run control surfaces. So if you chose to not have touchscreens and you just wanted to use a computer with a screen and a control surface, you totally can. MCU, MIDI control, they're there, you add them in. If it's there, it'll be available.
Right.
So you can set this up your way, and then it's with the show files over here, you have total recallability. One of the things that's making this really popular in the world right now is we're finding a lot of live engineers are actually buying their own LV1 system and either running it on a small computer or a laptop with like a MADI SoundGrid I/O, like an MGB from DigiGrid, and actually then using LV1 to control a show, and then just utilizing the pre's on the console that happens to be at the event.
Right.
So MADIing out of it, using LV1 and all of their plugins for the live show, and just using the bits that they have to on the other console that they're not familiar with. So again, flexibility.
Nice, yes. And does that extend then to if you have a separate console for monitors and for front of house?
Absolutely. One of the other ways that this gets utilized a lot is for either a monitors console or a lot of LV1s out there are being used for broadcast consoles. As long as you actually have some kind of way of getting the feed from the stage boxes, there's absolutely no problem at all. I just helped configure a church in Tennessee that's got 2 live consoles already in place for monitors in front of house. Both of them are utilizing Waves SoundGrid, so they both have SoundGrid DSP servers, Waves cards in the back of them, and are utilizing the plugins with multi-rack. And with LV1, all we did was put in a MADI box, a MADI to SoundGrid box that takes a split off the MADI stage box, and then gets everything and does its own mix for the broadcast.
Nice.
Straight out to live stream. It's very easy.
Nice, very flexible. Yeah, yeah. So tell us a little bit about the experience of mixing using a touchscreen, especially a multi-touch touchscreen like this versus using a hardware controller.
No problem. Firstly, one of the things that we're finding is some people who are so used to hardware consoles look at it and go, not so sure, until they actually spend 5 or 10 minutes on it and realize that it's actually pretty much the same. 10-finger touch on Windows 10 makes it a lot easier. If people are using it on an Apple operating system, there is only 1-finger touch.
Okay.
So we always suggest Windows 10, and right now we're suggesting it on a Mac Mini because it's a really solid computer running Boot Camp. So one of the key things here is the fact that people were always worried about what happens if my finger leaves the actual fader space that it was on. And one of the things we spent a lot of time designing was to make sure that you have this fader and you can concentrate on the show and know as long as your finger doesn't actually leave the screen and let go, the fader that you started working with is the fader or the faders that you will continue to work with.
Nice.
So if you've got 2 of them or 3 of them or whatever else. The other thing that we find really important is the ability to be able to change or move plugins any way you want. If you actually want to get rid of a plugin, all you do is literally just drag it off the page. And then when you add another plugin, you can choose exactly what you want, just add it, and then as soon as you bring it up, it brings it up there.
Nice. And you could have that on the second screen. You could have your plugins always pop up. Does it follow per channel as you select those?
Absolutely. So let's do that now. So let's close that screen, which flips it automatically back to there. Let's grab the channel screen and move it over here. I probably should have moved the screens around, but that's okay. So now I have my channel tab right here. And every time I click on a channel, not specifically a plugin, it will bring that entire rack of plugins over into this channel tab.
Okay.
This is probably an important time to mention again that you can have up to 8 plugins on every single channel. So, and to get to them, you just click them and touch them. Now, for the people who worry about being able to, grab it and move it, if you tap on something, everything is going to be available from this fader down here as well. So you tap that, it's there. You tap that, it's there. So there are always 2 ways to grab something if you want to. And also, if you have a control surface set up, you can actually map these out. So it makes it incredibly user-friendly.
Right.
Now, for people who are familiar with using SoundGrid-compatible hardware and SoundGrid DSP servers in the studio, the 8 plugin rack there may look familiar. We use that across the entire range of hosts. So all 3 SoundGrid hosts, whether it's Waves multi-rack working with another console or LV1 here, or working in a DAW with SoundGrid Studio, all of them utilize the 8 plugin rack and the same presets. Now, what that means is if I decide that I want to import from a file, so for example, if somebody's done a mix on an album and they want to use the same presets on the road, and they've used SoundGrid technology, those presets from that recording session will spill out with the same plugins and the same settings, regardless of whether you're using multi-rack connected to another console or whether you're using LV1.
Nice.
So we're bridging the gap between studio and live sound, and it's making it a lot easier for people.
Mm-hmm. Now I see emo plugins here, as well as the regular familiar Waves plugins. What's the difference?
Beautiful. So if we were going to release a live console, we couldn't do it without actually releasing that live console with things that come with every other console, like a filter, EQ, dynamics, channel strip, and noise generator. So we developed the emo series. The emo plugins are, let's say, the F2, so it's basically, that's your filter. You've got the D5, which is a 0 latency dynamics channel strip with gate, compressor, limiter, de-esser, and a leveler. This is a really, really cool plugin. It's totally transparent and very, very powerful. And then you have the emo Q, there it is. So the emo Q4. So again, 0 latency, completely transparent. And then the other one that we've released is, if you go into other, emo generator, because you've got to have a noise generator in a live console. So these plugins actually come with any of the 3 licenses of LV1, both the 16 channel, the 32 channel, and the 64 channel.
Okay.
So therefore, people can automatically have plugins and get up and running and mix a really good show just with the plugins that actually come with this.
Right.
The other thing, though, when we're talking about plugins, it's not just Waves plugins that work with eMotion LV1. It's any SoundGrid compatible plugin. So if you have the SoundGrid bundle from, say, Plugin Alliance, there's absolutely no reason why you can't have them installed on here and access them from exactly the same drop-down menu within each of your channels. Flux mastering plugins, PSP, I think Eventide are doing them. So there are lots of companies out there who are actually realizing the benefits of creating SoundGrid compatible versions of their plugins.
Nice.
Yeah.
And of course all the Waves plugins as
Nearly
well.
every single Waves plugins. There are some, just a few Waves plugins that we deemed not really applicable for live sound because they have so much latency. The original Waves tune, for example, is an extreme look ahead, therefore can't really be used in live sound.
Right.
However, one of the things that we did do was create a new plugin called Waves Tune Realtime, which is 0 latency for pitch correction. And that's actually now the only Wave SoundGrid compatible pitch correction out in the marketplace.
Wow.
Yeah, we're
Incredible.
pretty happy with that.
Incredible.
So you can drag plugins off, add them wherever you want. Now the other really cool thing about this chain is while you're actually getting your sound check ready, so let's, for example, let's just go back, flip back between A and B and go back again. So now we're back on our virtual sound check. Now while we're doing this, let's go back to this channel here, you can actually move these plugins around and change the chain, and the audio will not drop out, it will not click, it will not pop, and it gives you the ability to keep that creative flow without worrying about the technology. So you can really get your sound right without actually hearing anything that annoys us weird audio people.
Right. That's awesome.
It is awesome.
What an incredible system. Scalable, flexible, portable.
You're totally right. And one of the really important things here is that the latency is so extremely low with LV1 that your round trip latency before you even start with the plugin is around 0.8 milliseconds. So you've got a ton of flexibility. And if you really want to have a look at what happens with the latency on any of these channel strips, all you have to do is click the corner of any of the plugins in a rack on a channel, and it'll tell you the actual latency of the specific plugin and the latency of the entire rack. So you can really do your housekeeping.
Right.
And then if you want to, once you've done the show, export all of those racks and then bring them into Pro Tools and mix your album.
Nice. Nice. Incredible. Thanks for taking the time to show us the eMotion LV system. Really, really exciting stuff. I mean,
you.
it's so much more portable is really the thing that I keep, jumping out of me, is how easy to bring a couple of screens and a small rack and a computer, and you're ready to go.
Well, that's the beautiful thing. I mean, I brought this with me. I checked it on a plane. I have 2 small road cases that are TSA approved, and I checked it on the plane with my luggage, and brought with me a 2-screen 64-channel console with a huge amount of processing power. The processing power, by the way, also includes the mix engine. The mix engine for LV1 also goes through the DSP server. So you've got a 32-bit float mix engine that has enough dynamic room for anybody. I mean, you will never peak and clip on this. It's amazing.
Awesome. That's incredible. Thanks for coming in and sharing this with us.
Thank you,
Really
sir.
exciting stuff.
Thank you.
And a pleasure to see you as always. And thank you for joining me for Sweetwater Soundcheck. I'm Mitch Gallagher.